When did your golden child sibling finally stop getting away with everything? They spent their whole life walking on red carpets made of our silence. Every lie covered, every mess cleaned up for them. But then one night, they crossed the wrong line in front of the wrong person, and suddenly, no one could protect them anymore. Not even our parents. I'll start with this: we weren't a bad family. At least, not in the way people expect when they hear a story like this. We had a big, clean house and a good zip code. 2 parents who stayed married. Family photos at Christmas. We looked normal. But the longer I live, the more I realize that normal doesn't mean healthy. And in our house, everything revolved around my older brother Ryan. From as far back as I can remember, Ryan could do no wrong. If he came home late, it was because he was being responsible. If I did, I was being reckless. If he failed a test, the teacher was unfair. If I aced mine, it was because I had it easier. Every story, every excuse, every closed-door conversation behind voices that dropped to whispers. Always about him. And always in his favor. He was 2 years older. Taller, louder, magnetic in that fake sincere way that makes adults say what a charmer and kids secretly hate him. Teachers loved him, neighbors doted on him, our parents adored him to the point of blindness. And me? I was the kid they forgot to pick up from school once. I was the backup, the shadow, but I didn't resent him. Not at first. I figured that was just how life worked. Some people got the light, some learned how to live in the dark. The first time I realized something was really off was when I was 10. Ryan had just turned 12. There was this incident at a birthday party, one of those pool, pizza, and parents drinking wine in the kitchen suburban things. We were in the backyard. One of the kids, Michael, tripped and hit his face on the concrete. Split lip, nose bleeding. He said Ryan pushed him. There were 6 of us out there. 4 said they didn't see. I said I did. I said Ryan shoved him hard after Michael made a joke about Ryan being slow at swimming. Ryan denied it, cried, said I must have been confused. Mom pulled me aside later and told me we don't lie about family. That was the first time I understood. Truth didn't matter in our house, only loyalty did. And loyalty meant silence. By high school, Ryan had perfected the art of skating just above consequence. He shoplifted once, blamed a friend, crashed dad's car, blamed black ice, got caught cheating on a history exam, blamed the teacher for not explaining the assignment well. He was slippery, always just likable enough to avoid real punishment, and our parents defended every inch of it. Meanwhile, I learned how to disappear, got a job, got grades, got used to swallowing things whole so they wouldn't come out in the wrong room. But something shifted the year I turned 17. Ryan had dropped out of college by then, 3 semesters in. No degree, a pile of debt, and a plan he couldn't explain. He came back home just for a while, but the while stretched into months, then a year. He got a job at a local dealership because our dad knew the owner. He wore suits, talked big, pretended to be busy. But at night he got sloppy. He started going through my stuff. At first, I thought I was paranoid. I'd leave my wallet on the desk and come back to find it slightly out of place. My drawer wasn't quite shut the way I'd left it. Then money went missing. A $20 bill, then $40. One night, I left a folded piece of tape inside the drawer to see if it would lift. Next morning, it was peeled back. I told Mom. She looked uncomfortable and said maybe I'd forgotten how I left it. I told Dad. He didn't even look up from the paper. Don't stir trouble, he said. Your brother's got enough on his plate, so I stopped talking to them about it. Instead, I set up a cheap phone camera hidden inside a hollowed-out book. I positioned it on my shelf, pointing at my desk and drawer. I let it record overnight. It took 3 days, but I got what I needed. Footage of Ryan middle of the night entering my room, quiet, calm, opened the drawer, took a folded $50 I'd saved from my last paycheck, slid it into his pocket like it belonged to him. Then he looked around and left. I showed the video to my parents, and they did what they always did. They made excuses. He probably needed it for gas. You should have just asked him. You're being dramatic. That was the moment I realized something dangerous about my family. They didn't love Ryan for who he was. They loved the idea of him. They had invested so many years building the myth of their golden child, they couldn't afford to admit the truth anymore. Because the truth would make them complicit, so I stopped showing them things. I started saving screenshots, photos, every questionable thing Ryan did, texts he sent to old girlfriends, debt collection letters addressed to him, one especially disturbing browser history search I found when he used my laptop without permission. I kept it all. Then came the night he finally crossed the wrong line. He was dating a girl from the dealership, Emily. Sweet, soft-spoken, a little younger, way too patient for someone dealing with him. At first he treated her like a trophy, took her out, bragged, showed her off at family dinners like a prize. Then it shifted. He started showing up with bruised knuckles. She started pulling away from conversations, fidgeting more, smiling less. One night at dinner, I saw her flinch when he raised his arm too quickly. I said nothing, but I didn't let it go. A month later, she came to my door, eyes puffy, shaking. She didn't say what he'd done, just that she didn't know who else to go to. I let her in. Ryan showed up an hour later, banging on the door. I told him she didn't want to talk. He screamed, called me a traitor, said I was turning blood against blood. Our parents, they showed up 20 minutes later, and they sided with him. Even then, even with Emily still crying in my kitchen, they told me I had overstepped, that I was making Ryan look bad. that I should have come to them privately. That was the night I stopped being their child. I sent the file. All of it, everything I'd collected over the years, photos, videos, text logs. I sent it not to the police, not to our parents. I sent it to Emily's older brother. He was a lawyer. 2 weeks later, Ryan was fired. A month after that, Emily filed for a restraining order. And 3 months later, Ryan was under investigation for identity theft tied to a credit card opened in her name. And my parents, they finally looked at him like they were seeing him for the first time. I wish I could say it felt like justice. It didn't, it felt like grief, because somewhere deep down I still wanted them to love the truth. But they didn't. They just mourned the version of him that never really existed. Ryan moved states. My parents barely bring him up now. When they do, it's in soft tones, like he died and they're trying to remember the good. And me, I moved out, got quiet, built a life where no one gets to rewrite the story for me. I still think about that night sometimes, when Emily showed up and broke the pattern. And I wonder, if she hadn't come to me, if she hadn't made it visible, how long would I have kept cleaning up after him? How long would we all have kept walking on red carpets made of our silence? I don't know, but I'm not walking there anymore. The hardest part wasn't Ryan being exposed. It wasn't even watching our parents fumble through denial, bargaining, and thinly veiled shame. The hardest part was realizing how much of my life had been shaped not by choices, but by surviving him. Every major decision I'd made, what to study, who to date, when to leave home, had been filtered through one question. Will this make things harder with Ryan? And when I finally said no, when I finally let go of that question, I was left with a silence I didn't know what to do with. It's strange how quiet the world becomes when you stop chasing someone else's approval. I stopped returning my mother's calls for a while. Not out of punishment, but because I didn't know what we'd even talk about anymore. Ryan had always been the main character of her sentences. When I visited home once, just for a weekend, she asked how work was, and before I could answer, she segued into how Ryan had taken up woodworking like it was a redemption arc. Dad mostly avoided it. He talked about weather, sports, the yard. But his eyes did something strange when I looked at him too long. Like he knew. Like he regretted something but didn't have the language or spine to say it. I didn't push. I think part of me had already made peace with the fact that they wouldn't change. They'd made Ryan who he was, and then they kept him that way. The only thing worse than raising a golden child is refusing to admit you painted them gold yourself. I went to therapy. Not the kind with mantras and crystals, but the brutal kind. The kind where your therapist stares at you after a long silence and says, "What if your parents just weren't capable of seeing you?" That one sentence broke something open in me. I used to think I was unremarkable. That's how I justified it. Maybe I wasn't special enough. Maybe Ryan's orbit pulled more gravity because he deserved it. But now I see it differently. Ryan wasn't chosen because he was better. He was chosen because he was the one who required constant maintenance. And some parents confuse labor with love. They see the child who needs fixing and pour everything into them, not realizing the damage it does to the ones who learn to function without asking for anything. I wrote letters I never sent. One to Ryan where I told him that I didn't hate him, but I wouldn't come find him either. That I hoped, for his sake, someone in whatever new town he'd landed in would eventually call him out the way I did. One to Mom, where I wrote, "You once told me I was lucky to have a brother. I want you to know it never felt that way." And one to myself, 10 pages long, where I listed every memory I'd repressed to keep the peace, like the time Ryan broke my sketchbook in half and said I should draw better things. Or the time he lost my science project the night before it was due, and I got a 0. Or the time he told a girl I liked that I had a stutter just to make her laugh. I wrote it all out, read it aloud, burned it. It didn't heal everything, but it gave me something back, my own story. Not the one I was given, not the one I was allowed to have. Mine. Now, years later, I still flinch a little when someone talks about how close they are to their siblings. I nod, smile, but there's a part of me that still expects people to mean something else when they say family. Something more conditional, something more expensive. I have new friends now, chosen ones, the kind who notice when you go quiet in a room, the kind who ask twice if you say I'm fine. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't kept the receipts, if I'd just let Ryan keep getting away with it. Maybe our family would still look perfect from the outside, maybe Mom would sleep better, maybe Dad would feel more in control, but I wouldn't be here, not really. I'd still be somewhere inside that house, learning how to fold myself smaller and smaller until I fit in the spaces Ryan left behind. And I think that's the biggest thing I've learned. Just because someone stops getting away with everything doesn't mean they change. It just means they finally have to face what they left in their wake. And you get to decide whether to keep standing in it. I didn't. I walked out. I left the red carpet behind, and I haven't looked back. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was being forgotten. That if I just did everything right, stayed quiet, caused no waves, someone would eventually notice. Maybe Ryan would see me, maybe my parents would. I held on to that hope for far too long, but forgetting isn't the worst thing. Being remembered only when you're useful, that's worse. There were times, especially after Ryan was gone, when Mom would call out of the blue. Not to check in, not to ask how I was, but to ask for help, tech issues, tax questions, anything she thought I was good at. I'd answer. I always answered, for a while anyway, until I realized those calls were her way of pretending she had a relationship with me. Transactional love dressed up as family duty. One day she called, left a voicemail about some old printer she couldn't get to work. I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the screen, and I didn't call back. That was the first time I let myself choose me. It was a small thing, but it changed everything. Holidays got weird after that. First Thanksgiving without Ryan. Our parents tried to pretend nothing had changed. They made his favorite dish, set his place at the table. When I asked why, Mom said, in case he calls. He didn't, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free, like the air in that house finally had space for someone else to breathe. I still went home that year, but I left before dessert. Said I had plans. I didn't. I just needed to leave while I still felt like myself. By the next year, I didn't go back. I stopped sending gifts. I sent cards, short and polite. It was enough to show I wasn't cruel, but not enough to let them keep pretending. I got my own apartment, started over. Realized how many things I'd avoided trying because I was afraid someone would tell me I couldn't. Started writing again. Took a trip alone. Let people get close. But slowly, on my terms. Not every day was good. Some nights, the silence felt like a weight. Like maybe I'd made everything harder than it needed to be. But then I'd remember the version of myself I used to be. The one who waited for permission to be real, and I'd keep going. A year after Ryan vanished from our lives, I got an email. No subject. No name. Just an address in a town I'd never been to, and a line. If you ever want the full story, come see me. I deleted it. I still don't know if it was from him. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But even if it was, I didn't go. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I no longer needed his version of the truth to validate mine. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes the story doesn't end with confrontation. Sometimes there's no dramatic reckoning. No courtroom speech. No tearful apology. Sometimes people just drift. The damage is done, the mess is there, and the best you can do is choose not to carry it with you. I still keep that flash drive, the one with all the evidence. It's in a drawer buried under old papers. I don't look at it. I don't need to, but I don't throw it out either. Not out of spite, but because it reminds me I was right to speak, even when no one listened, especially then. If you're reading this and you've spent your life making yourself small for someone else, let this be your proof. You don't need a big moment. You don't need permission. You just need a line you won't let them cross anymore. And the courage to enforce it. Ryan finally stopped getting away with everything. But more importantly, I stopped letting him. That was the beginning of him falling and me finally standing up. A few years passed. The kind that don't announce themselves. You just wake up one day and realize it's been 3 winters since the last real conversation with your parents. And you didn't even notice the seasons changing. I'd moved again. Twice actually. Different coast. New job. A smaller apartment with a better view. No furniture passed down. No reminders. I told myself I was done with that chapter. That I'd made peace. And in a way I had. But peace doesn't mean absence of memory. It just means the memory doesn't control you anymore. Then one afternoon, I got a letter, not an email, not a call. A real physical letter with my name written in a hand I hadn't seen since high school. No return address, no stamp. It must have been dropped off by hand. I knew it was from him before I even opened it. Inside, a single piece of lined paper, folded twice. In the center, written in his usual rushed, slanted print. Do you still hate me? No explanation, no name, just that. I stared at the question for a long time, longer than I want to admit, because it was a trap, and I knew it. If I said no, I'd be inviting him back in. If I said yes, I'd still be tethered to him. The game would continue. Either way, so I didn't respond. I burned the letter in the sink. Watched the edges curl in and collapse. And when it turned to ash, I whispered, just to myself, just once, you don't get to ask anymore. I never heard from him again. It's funny how silence, when chosen, feels nothing like the silence that was forced on me growing up. Back then, silence was suffocation. Now it's oxygen. My parents never talked about the fallout. They still send cards on holidays, still write both our names in them. As if Ryan were just out of town, not out of the narrative entirely. I let them. I don't fight it anymore. Let them have their version of events, the one that's tidy and comfortable. I don't need to win the argument. I already won my freedom. A friend of mine once asked if I ever thought about reconnecting. People change, she said. I smiled. Not because she was wrong, but because I used to believe that too. Now I know, some people change. Others just learn how to hide their claws better. But I'm done pulling my sleeves over the scars just to make other people feel comfortable. I share more now. About my past, about what I learned. I don't minimize it. I don't apologize for the weight it still carries sometimes. Because I'm not ashamed of surviving something most people never even realize they're inside of. And if my story makes someone else pause, makes them rethink the roles they've been assigned, then it's worth telling, over and over. Because golden children don't become golden on their own. And silence doesn't keep families together, it just keeps the truth buried. until someone's finally brave enough to dig it out. So here I am, digging. A few months later, I ran into someone from the old neighborhood while grabbing coffee in a city I didn't expect to be recognized in. His name was Caleb. We'd gone to the same high school, shared a class once, barely spoke. He was older by a year, maybe two, and back then, like most people, he'd gravitated toward Ryan. Everyone did. I expected him to pass by, maybe offer a half smile and keep moving. Instead, he stopped, looked at me like I was a puzzle piece out of place. "You're Ryan's brother, right?" There it was, the old identity still following me. I nodded, cautiously. Used to be. He didn't laugh, didn't joke. Just said, "Yeah, I heard about everything, took guts." Most people wouldn't have said anything. I wanted to ask. Heard what exactly, but I didn't. I let the silence hold, then he added something I wasn't ready for, a lot of us knew. Not all of it, but we saw things. Just didn't think it was our business. It was the first time someone from our world had admitted that out loud. That I wasn't crazy, that the things I'd spent years gaslighting myself over were visible. Just ignored. I left the cafe with my heart hammering and hands shaking, not from fear, but from some weird combination of relief and rage. Because when you grow up in the shadow of someone like Ryan, you start believing that your version of reality must be defective. That maybe you're just oversensitive, overdramatic. Hearing someone else confirm it was like air rushing back into a room that had been sealed shut. I started writing more after that. Not for others, not online, just for myself. Journals filled up fast. Memories I hadn't thought about in years came rushing forward. Things I'd buried so deep they barely felt real until I saw them on paper. Like the time Ryan took my bike apart piece by piece, left it in the yard, and told my parents I must have broken it because I didn't know how to take care of things. Or when he read parts of my diary out loud to his friends, laughing like it was a show. They didn't stop him. I didn't either. And that was the cycle. For a long time, I blamed myself for not speaking up sooner. But the truth is, kids don't stay silent because they're weak. They stay silent because they learn early who gets believed and who doesn't. I wasn't the believable one. Ryan was. Now, as an adult, I get to pick who hears my voice, who stays, who doesn't. That's a power I never had growing up. And I guard it fiercely. Dating was hard at first. I'd flinch at raised voices, even if they weren't angry. I had trouble asking for things, would apologize for taking up space. It wasn't until someone looked at me after I said sorry for the 5th time in one conversation and asked, "Why are you apologizing for existing?" that I realized how deep the wiring went. I didn't have an answer. Not then, now I do. Because for years my presence was treated like a problem to manage, something to quiet down so Ryan could shine. But I'm done dimming. Eventually, I met someone. Slowly, we built something real. The kind of relationship where silence wasn't a threat and disagreement didn't come with punishment, where I could say no without fear. I told her everything eventually, not all at once, but in pieces, when I could breathe through it. She never judged, never tried to fix it, just listened, held space. It was the first time I felt what safe really meant. Not convenient, not performative, just honest. And even now, years into that stability, there are days when my old instincts show up. I'll hesitate before disagreeing, brace for a reaction that never comes. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means responding differently when the past knocks, and I've gotten better at that. My parents are older now, we speak sometimes. Holidays are neutral, more out of obligation than connection. They ask about work. I give short answers. We don't talk about Ryan. It's like a mutual unspoken agreement. The story doesn't get rewritten, but it doesn't get told either. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Not because they deserve peace, but because I do. I still carry pieces of my younger self. The version of me that waited for someone to choose him, to see him, to love him without conditions. And some nights I still grieve for that kid. But now when I think about him, I don't feel pity. I feel pride, because he survived a house that only had room for one spotlight, and he learned to shine without it. That's a kind of strength nobody gave him. He built it himself. So no, I don't know where Ryan is now. I don't check. I don't need to, because for once, I'm not the one keeping track of him. I'm finally keeping track of me. A few weeks ago, I got a message on a platform I barely use anymore. One of those old-school forums I signed up for during college. The notification didn't say much, just a username I didn't recognize and a short message. "I think you knew my sister." That was all it said. The name didn't register at first. Then I clicked the profile. Saw a single photo, a girl, maybe early 20s, soft eyes, holding a small dog. There was something about the face, something that felt familiar, but I couldn't place it until I zoomed in. Emily, she looked like Emily, but younger. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, heart pounding, mind racing. It had been years since I'd last heard anything about her. After she filed the restraining order and Ryan lost everything, she disappeared from our orbit completely, moved states, new job, started fresh. I didn't blame her, and now maybe her sister had found me. Eventually, I messaged back, kept it cautious. "I did. Are you her sister?" The reply came fast. "Yes, she passed away last year. I found some old journals. Your name was in them. A lot." I stared at that message for a long time. She passed away. There was no warning, no let up, just a gut punch in 3 words. The kind of news that doesn't scream, it just lands like a cold weight in your chest and sits there. Her sister continued. "She wrote about how you helped her. about how you were the first person who didn't make her feel crazy. I just wanted you to know that I sat with that for hours, maybe longer, because when you go through something like what I went through, you don't get trophies, you don't get closure, you don't even get to win. The best you can hope for is that somewhere in the chaos, someone else walked away better because of you. And now I knew she did. Emily made it out of our story long before I did. She left the town, the people, the weight of it all. And while her life may have ended too soon, she left a record behind. A truth, something I never expected to see. Her sister sent me a few scanned pages. One of them had a line I haven't been able to forget. Sometimes the safest place is the one person who believes you without asking for proof. I printed that page. It's folded in my wallet now, not for nostalgia, but as a reminder that believing someone fully without performance or requirement isn't small. It can change everything. It did for her. And honestly, it did for me too. Because in the end, Ryan didn't unravel because of police or parents or even the girl he hurt. He unraveled because someone finally told the truth out loud and refused to take it back. That truth is still with me, so is the fear, but now they live side by side. And when people ask me why I'm so private or why I don't talk to my family much or why I flinch a little when someone says siblings, I don't explain. I don't owe anyone the whole story, but sometimes when the moment feels right, I'll say, there used to be someone in my life who got away with everything. Until one day, he didn't, and I've been rebuilding ever since. Because that's what this is, not revenge, not justice, not even healing, just the slow, stubborn act of rebuilding something true after a lifetime of living inside someone else's lie, and I'm still building. It's strange how the world doesn't pause for your healing. There's no moment where everything stops so you can catch your breath. Bills still come, deadlines, anniversaries of things you'd rather forget. People ask polite questions and expect simple answers. Are you close with your family? Where'd you grow up? They don't know that every one of those questions feels like walking barefoot across broken glass. I've learned how to answer without answering. A smile, a shrug, a change of subject, but inside a whole storm still brews quietly, politely. Just below the surface, I saw my parents once more, briefly. It wasn't planned. I was back in my hometown for work, a conference. The hotel was only 15 minutes from the house I grew up in. I told myself I wouldn't go near it. I told myself I was past that, but on the last night I drove by, it looked smaller. The bushes were overgrown, the paint a little dull. I parked across the street, engine off, windows down, just sat there for a while, long enough for the porch light to flick on. And then I saw them. Mom, stepping outside holding a mug. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and just didn't recognize the car. But she stood there, looking out into the dark like she was waiting for something, or someone, and I realized something. They probably still saw themselves as the victims. Not in an overt, dramatic way, but quietly, they'd rewritten the story somewhere along the way. Maybe in their version, I turned on the family. Maybe I broke something that didn't need to be broken. Maybe Ryan was just troubled, and I was the one who made it public. I'll never know, because I never gave them a chance to tell me, and I don't want it. There's no part of me that needs to hear them say we were wrong. I used to need that desperately. But now I just need space. And I have it. After that night, I drove back to the hotel, slept like a stone, no dreams, no knots in my chest, just sleep. The next morning, I packed up and left before sunrise. No last look, no emotional music playing in my head. Just a clean exit. For once, I was the one who got to leave quietly. These days, I teach. Small college, writing and ethics. The irony isn't lost on me. I help students find their voice while still repairing the damage done to mine. I tell them that truth is power, that story is survival, that silence is a language, one often used to protect the wrong people. They listen, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with pain flickering behind their eyes. I can always tell which ones came from houses like mine. The way they flinch at praise, the way they double-check every sentence before speaking. I don't push them. I just hold the door open. Sometimes that's all someone ever needed. I keep a photo on my desk. Not of Ryan, not of my family, just a candid shot of me, taken by someone I trust. I'm laughing. It's not a perfect photo, my hair's messy, my shirt's wrinkled, but I keep it there because it reminds me of who I became, not who I was told to be. Some days I still think about Ryan, not with rage, not with nostalgia, just curiosity. Does he tell his story differently now? Does he blame me? Or did he ever, even once, sit with the truth long enough to recognize it? It doesn't matter. His ending isn't mine to write, because this isn't a story about Ryan. It never was. It's a story about what happens when the silence finally breaks, when the pedestal tips, when the family golden child loses their shine, and the kid in the corner learns to speak, loudly, clearly, and without apology. And I haven't been quiet since. There's a box I keep in the back of my closet, labeled, taped shut. Most days I forget it's even there. But once in a while, when the air shifts, when something about the world feels just a little off, I'll pull it out, not to open it, but to remind myself it exists. Inside are pieces of the life I left behind, a few old photos, a birthday card from my dad with no message inside except "Love, Dad," my high school yearbook where Ryan scribbled over my senior quote, and the flash drive, the one with everything, evidence, screenshots, records, backups of files Ryan thought he deleted, copies of messages he forgot he sent. I used to keep it as leverage, just in case. I told myself it was about justice, about being prepared if he ever came back, if he ever tried to twist the story. But now, I keep it as a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that it happened, all of it, that I didn't imagine the gaslighting, the isolation, the way people looked past it because it was easier to believe in the golden child than to believe the kid in the corner who barely spoke. I haven't added to the box in years, haven't needed to. Because the truth doesn't need updating, it just needs to be remembered. Sometimes I still dream in that house. The floor plan is never quite right, the rooms shift in size, the colors are wrong, but the feeling is always the same, heavy, close, like breathing through fabric. In those dreams, Ryan is always there, not doing anything, just present, watching, waiting. I wake up with my fists clenched, but I wake up, and that's the difference now. The dream ends. The real world is mine again. I built something, slowly, painfully, brick by brick. A career that I chose, not one chosen for me. A circle of friends that see me for who I am, not who I pretended to be. A partner who knows the whole story and stays anyway. And on most days, that's enough. But healing isn't linear. Some days I still wonder what it would have been like to grow up in a home where love wasn't conditional, where apologies were given without being dragged out, where the brightest kid wasn't the one who lied best. There's a part of me that'll always ache for that version of childhood I never got. And that's okay. Grief doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from the absence of something that was never there to begin with. But I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I'm not waiting. I'm done waiting. Because somewhere between the silence and the shouting, I found my voice, and I decided it was worth keeping. So now when people talk about their siblings with fondness, I listen. I smile. I don't envy them. I don't interrupt. I let them have their joy and then I go home. I lock my door, I make tea, I write, I build, I live, on my terms. No more red carpets, no more shadows, just a long, quiet road ahead. And finally, my own footsteps. Last month, I got invited to speak on a panel, one of those navigating family trauma sessions that colleges host when they remember mental health matters. I almost declined. The idea of sitting under fluorescent lights and sharing personal wounds with strangers didn't appeal to me. But something told me to go. Maybe it was closure, maybe curiosity. I sat in a circle of folding chairs with 6 others. A woman whose father vanished when she was 12. A guy who fled a cult at 19. A soft-spoken girl who was raised by grandparents because her mother couldn't stay clean. All of them survivors in different shapes. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about Ryan, not directly. I talked about being the forgotten sibling, the one whose report cards were glanced at, whose birthdays were last-minute cards, whose pain was always not as bad as someone else's crisis. I didn't name names, didn't point fingers. But I told the truth, slowly, without flinching. Afterward, a student came up to me. She looked barely 20. She had a notebook with tabs and post-its and a nervous grip on her pen. She said, "I didn't know until today that I was allowed to be angry." And I told her what I wish someone had told me a decade earlier. You always were. Because for years, I thought the only way to earn love was to stay silent, to behave, to disappear a little. I didn't know that love that requires your erasure isn't love, it's control. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I'll probably never hear from Ryan again. That letter in the envelope was the last act, the last whisper of a connection that had been dead for years before it stopped breathing. My parents, they're aging. Sometimes I think about what'll happen when they're gone. If I'll feel relief or sadness or just a strange numbness. I don't know, but I do know this: I've already mourned them, not as people, but as the idea of parents I never had. That grief came and passed like a season. Now there's just distance and freedom, because when you grow up in someone else's orbit, you never get to feel gravity for yourself. You spin, you react, you burn fuel just trying to stay upright. But eventually, if you're lucky, you drift far enough out to stop spinning. You float, you breathe, you exist, without explanation, without apology. I used to think my story wasn't worth telling, that no one would believe me. That people would say it couldn't have been that bad. He was so charming, so successful, but stories don't need to be loud to matter. Some are quiet, some are small. Some unfold slowly over decades, whispered in rooms with locked doors and tired eyes, and when you finally tell it, when someone listens, when they say, "Me too," and you realize you weren't crazy, just unheard, that's everything. So no, I didn't win. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no headline, no apology. No Facebook post where someone finally took accountability, but I did get something better. I got out, I stayed out, I healed, and now I live a life that's mine, which after everything feels like the most radical act of all. Because the golden child was never supposed to fall, and I was never supposed to rise, but here I am, still standing, still building, still here.